Welcome to the Insomnia Coach podcast. My name is Martin Reed. I believe that by changing how we respond to insomnia and all the difficult thoughts and feelings that come with it, we can move away from struggling with insomnia and toward living the life we want to live. The content of this podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only. It's not medical advice and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, disorder, or medical condition. It should never replace any advice given to you by your physician or any other licensed healthcare provider. Insomnia Coach LLC offers coaching services only and does not provide therapy, counseling, medical advice, or medical treatment. The statements and opinions expressed by guests are their own and are not necessarily endorsed by Insomnia Coach LLC. All content is provided as is and without warranties, either express or implied.
Tim's insomnia began during a stressful time in his life. At first, it was just a few bad nights, but the more he worried about it, the worse it got. The harder he tried to fix his sleep, the more he struggled. Things started to change when Tim learned a new way to deal with insomnia. He realized that trying to control sleep was actually keeping him stuck. So, instead of resisting wakefulness, he began to give it permission to exist. As he stopped following strict sleep rules and gave himself more freedom, Tim learned that being awake at night wasn't the real problem. It was his response to the fear of not sleeping that made things harder. Over time, as Tim let go of the struggle, sleep showed up all by itself, without him needing to go to war with insomnia night after night. And when he stopped chasing after sleep and focused on living his life independently of sleep, insomnia lost the stranglehold it once had over his life.
A full transcript of this podcast and an accompanying video can be found at insomniacoach.com/podcast. Okay, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come onto the podcast.
You're very welcome. Glad I could be here.
Great to have you on. Let's start right at the beginning. When did your sleep problems first begin, and what do you think caused your initial issues with sleep?
Well, as you've talked about before, there seems to always be that precipitating event. I think I've set myself up through a lifetime of sleep the way I valued it and thought about it and so forth. But it was January 24th, the night of 2023. I was on a business trip and I had a bunch of things going on in my personal life. It was a big meeting the next day. In Madison, Wisconsin, where I live in Wisconsin. And I think I woke up probably about midnight, 1 o'clock, and I never got back to sleep the rest of the night. And I just kind of attributed it to what was going on in my life, the meetings that were going on the next day. I had just gotten a new dog too, and we were getting ready to have her spayed. She was older, and then she went into heat, and so we had to cancel, and that had me a little anxious and so forth. But so like I did the next day, I was really tired, but ground through it, had good meetings, and got home that night. And as was often the case, if I had one night of bad sleep, I would take, it was an allergy medication to help me sleep on that night. But, leading up to this too, I think this was the culmination of a lot of angst, but it was something as simple of our workday started a half hour earlier. So we were going to, instead of starting work at 8 o'clock, we were starting work at 7:30. And I was driving roughly 45 minutes each day. I also work out in the morning before I go to work. So I was already getting up at about 4:50. So I realized I was going to have to start getting up at about 4:20 and 4:15, 4:20 right in there. And I was just thinking, dang, I'm going to have to get to bed even earlier now. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of a potentially a miserable day. And I had always been kind of rigid and really guarded my sleep. It's not like I needed a full 8 hours. It seems for me like 7 hours was always that ideal. And I could do 6, and there was times I could do 5 and 4, but I would always get back into that pattern. But for whatever reason, this kind of just got into my head that, I'm gonna have to be getting up like almost a half hour earlier, and all the kids were kind of still at home. They were young adults, and I kind of like to be able to listen to them, because it seems like just about the time I was going to be going to bed, they all like to start coming out and start talking. They're like vampires where they come alive at night. Wouldn't see them throughout the day, but it just kind of got into my head. And then that night, like I said, down in Madison, laying in bed, and I didn't even give it much thought. But I had probably, I don't remember exactly, maybe it was a couple nights later, I had another rough night's sleep. And then these just kind of started compounding. And it was so interesting because just before this kind of hit, I was just happened to be listening to another podcast, and maybe even it was a YouTube short or something. But they had a sleep expert on there that was talking about the exact number of people that can survive on 6 hours or less of sleep a night. The sum total is absolutely 0. And I remember my daughter, who's just started her work as a mental health therapist, she goes, did you happen to? And I told her I saw the exact same thing. So that made an impression on me. So you're getting fed all this information that, you're more likely to potentially contract Alzheimer's. There's a lot of, you're more susceptible to illnesses. Your immune system can take a hit. Just nothing good happens when you're not sleeping on a regular basis. So you've got that information coming at you. And at the same time, like I said, and it just continued to compound over a couple of weeks. And I just remember walking down the hallway at work one morning, it might have been morning, afternoon, just thinking, I'm trashed. I don't know how long I can keep this up. And all of a sudden it started getting to the point where I felt this anxiety growing in my stomach. And that's kind of where I carry anxiety. It's a tightness, it's a soreness, and it's just heavy. And it became this all-consuming obsession about, what am I going to do? What's going on? Why am I so broken all of a sudden? And again, like I said, I had so much going on in my personal life with my marital relationship and things like that. So I think that probably, but it had something to do with it as well, getting my nervous system so wound up. But I remember one night, I probably was only asleep for a couple hours, and I woke up with and I stood up and, sat up in bed, and it was like my heart's pounding. I'm looking around, I'm sweating. And it was really scary. And I think I ended up getting back to bed, but I started taking more cold medication. And in the middle of the night when I'd wake up, I would take more medication. And then I remember my wife had some prescription sleeping pills, and I would try taking those. And I remember waking up or just be laying there. It's still 2:30, 3 a.m. in the morning. And I would take some more medication, knowing I'm going to be potentially shot that next day, but just chasing that sleep, just trying to eke out a little more sleep, which wasn't coming. And it was just making things worse. So it's that vicious cycle, that we always talk about. It's the less I slept, the more the anxiety came, the more the anxiety came, the less I slept. And I finally got to this point where I went to my, oh no, even before that, I almost forgot. It was early in the morning, probably about 4 a.m. And I had been keeping a friend apprised of this, and he talked about going through the same thing before I did. But he talked about taking, that cold medication. He goes, just a half of one every night. And, and usually that'll get you through it. And that's all you need to do is just break this pattern. But I woke up particularly anxious that morning. I think I got to the point too, where I was so hyper vigilant. I was checking my heart rate all the time. So just throughout the day, I'm going, geez, why, because typically I got a super low heart rate. It's 55, 58. I get up and work out every day, and I'd be pounding away in the 70s, upper 70s sometimes. And I'm thinking, well, that's not good, which of course doesn't calm you down. It's like when somebody tells you when you're a little aroused and somebody tells you to calm down, it has the converse effect a lot of times. So I was just doing all these things that in retrospect was making things worse. I really started trying to kind of conserve energy, I think, to a certain extent, and start cutting things out. And I was also going to recovery meetings at that time. So I've been in recovery from substance abuse. It's 22 years now. But I stopped going to those meetings during this time as well, because I'm thinking, I got to get to sleep earlier, even if I'm just laying in bed, and I just need to do something. So back to that morning when I woke up and I called up my friend, and it seems like when you're in the middle of the night, there's those voices that start whispering to you when you're in such distress. This is not good. I don't think you're going to make it through this. You're going to end up losing your job potentially. Oh man, you could end up losing your family. Oh, this is not going to be good, Tim. And your brain, which, as you've mentioned, does such a great job of protecting yourself, goes into overdrive. It starts telling you lies, which I never had any reason to believe it would lie to me like that. But it was interesting because we had some training once where the trainer I think it was just about media, about Facebook and so forth, posting, but he talked about our brains. He says our brains, we've survived through the years as a result of our brains being really good at telling us when danger is lurking, whether that danger is real or not. And I remember this trainer once, she was talking about this guy who talked about how there were all these snakes in the garage, and he was scared to death, and he turned on the lights and it was just rope, bunch of rope laying on the garage floor. And she said, a lot of times the snakes in our lives are just hunks of rope laying on the garage floor, which didn't even mean anything to me as much as it did after going through this experience. So I called up Mark that morning, and I ended up going into the ER. I was having a panic attack. I'm shaking. I couldn't breathe. And I ended up going in there, and the experience I had in there with the doc was really troubling. I work in mental health. I work in a human services department, but he just kept on asking me, so what do you want me to do? So have you been drinking? I said, no, I haven't drank for 20 years. Are you doing drugs? No, I don't do drugs. Well, what's going on? And I told him that I had to start getting up a half hour earlier for work, and I just kind of fell apart. And he's just looking at me with this jaundiced view, which I know you get a lot of medication seekers coming into the ER. And finally, my friend Mark spoke up and started telling him, hey, listen, blah, blah, blah. And he looks at him and he goes, are you a doctor? And he goes, as a matter of fact, I am. So then all of a sudden I had legitimacy with this physician in the ER. Well, what do you want me to do? Do you want to sleep, or do you want to not have anxiety? I'm going, I don't know. Is it a choice? Can I have both? I don't know. I've never been in this situation before. I'm coming to you for help. I'm scared to death. I feel like I could die at any time. So he gave me a benzo, and he gave me, I think it was a hydroxyzine or something like that. So I was able to go back home. I think I slept for 2 hours, 3 hours, but I woke up just feeling all right. And that was the benzo probably at work. And I had a couple meetings, Zoom meetings that day where I was able to work from home. But it was just, that was the only relief I had, I think, for those couple hours for a while after that. But I ended up going to my regular doc 2 to 3 days later. I think I had that follow-up visit. So what do docs do when you come in with anxiety? They do what they know. And they're doing the best they can, but it involves medication. So I got put on 2 anti-anxieties. He knew of my addiction history. I really was never into benzos, so we stayed away from those. And we went into a SSRI and Bupa. Can't remember what the other one. Neither one was a PRN, but there was 2. One was kind of an adjunct for the SSRI. But to me, it was something. And I just remember, I just felt like I was doing something and just getting a little bit of relief and feeling that knot kind of lift. And he told me, he goes, I've been through the same thing. You wouldn't be surprised how many people go through this. So are you adverse to medication? I'm at the point where I'm like, no. I mean, I just want something to make me feel better. Can you give me sleeping pills? Yeah, we'll give you sleeping pills, but I don't want you to take them for more than 10 days. So I was good to go with that. And I didn't want to get on those just because I know the dangers. I mean, I did a lot of, during my research, which I had done more of that week since I was in grad school, 35, 40 years ago, whatever that was, on sleep. That was a reoccurring theme. You got to be real careful of these prescription sleep medications because they can cause long-term issues. And I didn't want to have the hangover. I had to be sharp at work and so forth. So I think that was on a Wednesday. And then we were leaving, my wife, we were going on a trip to Puerto Rico. And I was ready to can it at that point. But we decided to go through with it. And interestingly enough, as I hear, on the boards when we were chatting back and forth, you hear people when they go on trips where all of a sudden things kind of subside and they get better. So I was on this trip down in Puerto Rico. I slept really good the first night. I was taking the antidepressants, and I think I was also doing melatonin. So, I thought it was going to be working, and that's what we know is that if you think something's going to work, it's going to probably work for a while. I slept pretty good that week, and I remember just being elated every morning when I would wake up and I would have slept pretty well. It was just like I had just won one of the biggest fights in the world. I'm a world champ. I slept the whole night. I'd get up. I always got up. I was one of those individuals who get up 2, 3, 4 times a night, but I could always fall back asleep. But I remember the last night in Puerto Rico, I slept absolutely 0. So I slept all the way home basically on the plane, but it was probably Sunday night where I woke up with one of those starts again. It was just, and my heart's pounding and everything. And I remember calling up the doc, and he just said, well, I think, you should, as an adjunct to your medication, you need to get involved in therapy as well. So I called up, and just doing those things also seemed to give me some relief. I was doing something, and it feels like you're moving forward and that things are going to be okay. And things weren't really okay. They seemed to get a little better at times, but that knot in the stomach and just that preoccupation with sleep. So then after I got done with this sleeping medication, I was doing research, and I found another one. And I remember going to the pharmacy that day, and it was like there's probably 50 people in line. And I'm thinking, I gotta wait here. I mean, I can't go home without this medication. I need this medication or I'm not going to sleep well. And I remember the pharmacist looking at me and going, you're going to sleep for about 16 hours when you take this. And I'm just like, thank you. That's all I needed to hear. Well, of course, I cannot not do research. So as I started really researching this, what this was good for was helping you fall asleep. And that was never my issue. I could always fall asleep. The issue was staying asleep, waking and getting back to sleep once I woke up. So once I saw that was very disappointing to me. And of course, my brain went, this isn't going to work. I don't even know why you're taking it. But I knew it was short acting as well. And I think that was one of those things. One morning, it was about 3 a.m. I had been up for quite a while, and I thought I might as well take one of those because it's going to only last for a couple hours. And I had a meeting that morning, and sitting in that meeting, trying to fight through that sleeping pill, and my brain's just kind of scrambled. I remember just thinking, I can't do this. this is no way to be living. And then somebody came along with something. It was magnesium. That it's great for fighting anxiety. So of course I bought a big bottle of magnesium, the kind that you're supposed to use for that. I started taking that. I had rituals. I remember at one point I was eating a banana with peanut butter on it for a snack before I went to bed. And I slept 2 nights in a row, and I went, that's the magic bullet. It's peanut butter and banana. There's something in that combination that's allowing me to sleep. So I ate peanut butter and banana for a week and a half until it didn't work. And then it was like, oh no, that wasn't the magic bullet. And I think I had just other things I was doing, other just rituals. Of course, there was all the sleep hygiene, making sure the room's cooled. I was cutting off. I always liked a cup of coffee in the afternoon, not a whole lot, but just usually something to give me a little bump. And I liked 5-hour energies as well. Just gives me a little bump. It was nothing where I felt like I was, did an amphetamine or something, but it just made my brain clearer and sharper. So I did away with all that. I remember doing away with, I was listening to meditative type YouTube videos just before bed, but I'd always make sure that my phone was upside down so I wasn't having any blue light coming on me, because that stuff is death to sleep. And even though in the past I knew I'd watch videos and fallen asleep watching videos as I was watching them, it's like that had nothing to do with that. And somewhere during my incessant research and scrolling, I come across the Insomnia coach and watched one of the first, I think it was a couple of videos, and there was one that you have on there about sleep education, about how your body always gives you the amount it needs to stay alive. And I just remember hearing those words, and it was like, man, I almost get emotional now, because it was life-giving. It was hope. I just started watching more because I'm a skeptic at heart. And I remember thinking when I got into Narcotics Anonymous 22 years ago, well, I know it worked all for them, but I'm different and I'm unique. And I even remember a sponsor telling me, so you think you're pretty unique, huh? He goes, you're not. Quit, stop it. You haven't had a unique thought in your head that somebody else hasn't had. Because you'd hear other people saying things that you only thought you thought in the darkest of times, and you go, oh, dang, geez, wow, maybe I'm not that broken. But as I started listening to things and researching it, it just started really making sense. And that brings me up to how I found you.
That was a big journey that you were on. Now you're able to reflect on it. It's clear that you've learned a lot from it and that you've experienced a lot of personal growth from it. But when we're going through that experience, it's so difficult. Where we can kind of get pulled into this trap, this vicious cycle, is when we completely understandably try to fix things. We might start to go to bed earlier or stay in bed later. We might do less during the day. We start to put more pressure on ourselves to sleep, where sleep was always effortless, perhaps, but now it becomes this thing that we have to put pressure on ourselves to perform. We have to put effort into it. We have to try harder to make it happen. And then we kind of get in this loop, right?
Absolutely. Spot on. Because the more effort I put into it, just the worse it became and the more frustrated I became. And I remember the one day my oldest daughter was visiting, and we had a really good day the first day, and she was living out of town. But I remember Saturday night, I had a bad night. And I woke up, and all I could think about was the bad night. I couldn't think about the fact that my daughter was here visiting. It was her last day. There was a snowstorm going on, which I love a good snowstorm. Just being able to kind of snuggle into the house. But all I could think about and all I was consumed by was the fact that I had a really bad night. And was I going to have a bad night tonight? And was tomorrow going to just be horrible? at work because I had a lot to do. And if I don't get sleep, it's not going to be good.
And like you touched upon, it's completely normal for us to have those kind of thoughts because it's our brain doing its job of looking out for us. And it's always going to look at where we're struggling most, what the big obstacles are, what the worst possible outcome or the worst possible scenario is. So to use your example of there might be snakes in the garage, turn the light on, oh, it's just ropes. But what if it was snakes? That thought has probably just saved your life. The brain doesn't care that it messed up and it was actually ropes. It's always going to be focusing on what is the worst possible outcome. And that's another potential source of struggle, right? Because we can identify that as another obstacle to sleep. We can identify it as something that doesn't feel good. We'd rather not have those thoughts and feelings. So then we start to try and fight them or avoid them. And we start to struggle even more with them. It's like we're engaged in this big tug-of-war battle with our mind. And our mind is always going to win because it's hardwired to generate all of these thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt about it. So I kept on exploring your videos on YouTube and looking at things. And I think I finally got to the point where I took the free course. And I just thought, well, I was feeling a lot of relief just with the education and understanding a little bit about what was going on. It gave me a ton of relief, actually. And I finally started doing the free course. Got through it, and things just kept on improving and improving. And I started thinking, and I was on trazodone. I was doing I think a half of one or maybe even a full tablet for every night before bed. So I think that's one of the first things I started doing was weaning off of that. So I went down from the full to a half to a quarter. And then I talked to my doc about weaning off the antidepressants. I said, I don't think generalized anxiety is really my issue. I said, my anxiety came from not sleeping. So I started going off of one, and then I slowly titrated it off the other. And things just kept getting markedly better. But I remember, and even once in a while now it hits, I'll wake up at night and it's like, well, am I going to get to sleep? Am I going to get back to sleep? And it's so funny how and it really wasn't a long time that I had it, but it was just so indelibly imprinted into my mind about how horrible it was that it's almost like a trauma response, that you have from that. You can have really good days and you can do some really good things when you haven't slept. And I think I put together a string of those. And I remember one day in particular, I hadn't slept. I think I kept a journal, and I think I said I've slept 7 hours in the last 3 days, and I had one of the best days ever today. And I was talking to an individual. I was in a jewelry store getting my daughter's, I think, a necklace fixed. And he started telling me he goes, I don't know if you know this about me, but, I 25 years I've been drinking hard. I've heard you talk about recovery, and I'm just at the point now. And we had this really good discussion about him wanting to quit drinking, get into recovery. And it just made my day. And I remember going home, and this is after having, like I said, 7 hours of sleep in 3 days. It was an awesome day, and realizing that you can do it. But I think all that about knowing you can get through the day, you might not feel uber awesome, but you can. And the other thing I remember doing, if I forgot my wallet, if I forgot my lunch, it was because I didn't sleep. It's not just because I can be an airhead sometimes and just forget stuff, or just like we all do, we forget stuff. Everything that happened, I was attributing to, well, there you go. You look at this mistake. You would have never made this mistake if you would have been getting 7 hours of sleep, where it's like, no, you make mistakes like that.
That could be true, right? But maybe not all the time. And that's what our brain tries to tell us, right? It's like all of the time, every mistake we make or every difficult or uncomfortable feeling is because of not getting a certain amount or a certain type of sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So everything started really getting on track. And I think it was probably April. I remember it was April-ish, going through just about halfway, 3/4 of the way through the free sleep course. And I was down in Madison, and I just remember just feeling so positive. I took a walk that night, and it was spring, and feeling really good. And that's when it just seems like everything was really starting to gel. And I was back on my game. And I was probably 2 months later, mid-May, when my wife and I separated. And even through all that, I remember the first night, I was kind of thinking, "Jeepers, I wonder if I'm going to sleep tonight." And I remember getting up for maybe like an hour and thinking, you know what, this is normal. My gosh, look at what you're going through. Maybe 2 hours, did a little deep research on divorces and this and that, but fell back asleep. And maintained my sleep throughout that whole time. And it just gave me, I think, strength or confidence, that I was back on track. Well, spring ahead to November 26th. And I remember that night, I was in the process of selling our house. That's the one where we had lived for 25 years. And winter was coming, and I was nervous. So I had moved out of it. I had moved into town, and that house was sitting there vacant. And I was so worried about the furnace shutting off or pipes freezing or something like that. And I remember just that day, and I think it was Thanksgiving weekend, where my daughter's boyfriend was home, and he goes, "Yeah, I always remember my parents with their rentals is you always got to turn the water off downstairs in case the furnace quits. Otherwise, you're going to have broken pipes." And it was like I woke up at 3 a.m., I think it was, with that thought stabbing me right between the eyes like an ice pick. Holy cow, you got to get out there and turn that water off. You could have an issue. And that was the beginning of everything all over again. I started getting these late night kind of intrusive thoughts, and I didn't have the anxiety right away. It kind of built. And I was, at that time, I was going through therapy as well. And I remember talking with my therapist about it, and she's just like, "Well, that happens, and you're going through a lot right now." And I don't think a lot of people really get it. And even this one person I was talking to, she's getting her PhD in public health, and she goes, "Oh, I'm doing a paper right now on sleep. And sleep hygiene is so important." And I remember just saying, "Oh no," I said, "You're kind of missing the boat." And tried to have a 5-minute conversation with her about it. But that's where people go right away. Nobody seems to have that knowledge about what causes that. You're tired but wired. That tired but wired feeling is horrible. And I try not to put even those types of adjectives, attach it to it anymore, because it's just well, no, it's not. It's not that horrible. You're tired. Okay, big deal. Move on. You're going to get through it. You're going to sleep eventually. But I remember so that was November 26th, for probably like the next 2 months, just having issues. And I actually had some benzos that were given to me for something else. There was only like 10 of them. But I remember thinking, well, I know they can help you sleep. So on nights where I really needed to sleep, or if I woke up like at 2 a.m. and I didn't think I was going to get back to sleep, I'd cut one in half or even just do a quarter. And it was enough to fall asleep. But I was back to kind of chasing the sleep, putting a lot of pressure on. And I remember I was officiating a good friend of mine's wedding. And I remember people telling me, "You just got to be kind to yourself." And we talk, and you talk about that a lot. And that's one thing I was never really good at. As an athlete, I was a high performing athlete. You can't be real kind to yourself. You got to kind of be a little tough on yourself and grind through things sometimes. Well, you can't grind through this. It doesn't work that way. But I remember doing the same thing. I was up at 1, 2 in the morning. But then that night, I ended up going down to La Crosse, where he was getting married, and I'm in a motel. So just a little different environment. And I slept like a baby that night. No anxiety or anything. And it was great. In fact, he got married on New Year's Eve. So it was kind of a cool night. But going back, I remember talking about chasing sleep too. And I would bedroom jump. I'd go from my bed, when my bed would get too uncomfortable, I'd jump up to my daughter's in the other room in the other part of the house. And it was always a little colder there and a little more comfortable. Or I'd jump back to my bed, just trying to find, like the three bears. This bed was, too big. This one was too small. This one was just right. And you're always looking for the one that's just right, which is evidenced by where you pass out that night. Oh, boy, last night I slept there. Well, I would have probably slept eventually in my own bed as well. But things just kept escalating. And I remember I'm an outdoorsman. I love to fish. I love to hunt. And I remember being out duck hunting and it seems like if I would take some medication, I would sleep really well that night. I was almost like a guilty feeling. I'm like, that was not a good night's sleep because I had taken that medication. That's false. That's not a good night's sleep. That's a chemically induced sleep. And it would almost cause, even though I was rested, I would have more anxiety over that, thinking what's going to happen tonight. Yeah, last night you did, but you took that. And you don't want to take it 2 nights in a row. So what's going to happen tonight? And just those mind games. And I'm sitting in this beautiful marsh, with a friend. And in the back of my mind, I'm playing that movie. Are you going to sleep tonight or are you not going to sleep tonight? Oh, man, this is really getting weird. You thought you were over this, but it's back again. And it seems even worse. And I remember eventually it was the latter part of January. I got it written down in my January, like about January 28th, 29th. And I woke up with one of those again and just went, all right, I'm done. And so I enrolled in the full course. And that morning, as I'm sitting there, because I was still getting up at 4:30, but I think I was signed up by 4:45, and by 5 o'clock, I was working on the first lesson, and just going, oh my gosh, just the first couple of things, the first couple lessons were just it gave so much hope. And again, it just feels like you're doing something too.
It is so easy to get pulled back into the struggle. So the fact that you went through this period where things felt like they were going pretty well, like, oh, I'm back on track. You had that hope. You felt like you were making good progress. And then something happened or a difficult night showed up again. And then you find yourself almost automatically just getting pulled back into the struggle. There's nothing unique or unusual about that. All it means is we've got that opportunity again to be aware of the fact that we're getting pulled into that struggle and choose to respond in a different way. And that's not easy. It's really easy for us to sit here and say it using words. It's the action that matters.
It was so disappointing and so defeating when it started rearing its head again. It was just like, I cannot believe this. And my friend Mark, the guy who took me to the ER, I remember him telling me, he goes, wow, you've sure had a lot of great opportunities for growth lately. This is fantastic. And I'm like, I just almost want to smack you right now, Mark. But, it's a great reframe. And, and then when it started hitting me too, and I remember thinking, maybe I need to get back on some anti-anxieties. You know what? I need trazodone. That's the one thing that worked. I know trazodone will work. So I went, because I'd thrown everything away. I remember calling up my primary and just saying, hey, do you think I could get that trazodone again? And I started taking a half at a time until it didn't work. And I remember really struggling after I purchased the course too. And I've listened to people and you don't say whether or not to do it or not to do it. And it was my own personal conviction that I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I think I want to do it right, because I see people that don't use medication and they get through this just fine. And I never needed it I'm 62 years old. So for 60 some years, I really didn't need medication to sleep. And so that's when I made the decision, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to wean myself off of it. I'm going to see how this works for 2 weeks. If I see no improvement whatsoever and it's absolutely horrible, then I'll go back on it. Well, it wasn't absolutely horrible. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. But it kind of takes the pressure off when you reframe things as this is all just an experiment. I don't know if it's going to work or if it's not, but let's just give it a shot. And if it doesn't, I can stop, or I can always start in again. Plenty of people take medication for sleep their whole life and it works just fine. And you kind of talk yourself into it. But let's go this route.
I love framing changes as experiments, because that's what they are, and they're learning experiences. There's no such thing as failure, as far as I'm concerned. As long as we learn, as long as we take something from what we've experimented with, then how could that be a failure? I'm curious to know, as you were working through the course, what changes you made either to your approach to sleep or your response to insomnia or anxiety, any of the other difficult stuff that comes with it. What changes you made that you feel were most beneficial or most helpful?
Well, I think the way the course is laid out initially, it was that physical thing about, and it's called sleep restriction, but I just call it the sleep window. Sleep restriction seems so barbaric and people hear it and it seems really hard, but it's really just my sleep window. So I ended up reducing that. I thought I'm still getting up at 4:30, but 6 hours seems workable, and I'm going to do whatever. And it's funny how creative you can get to keep yourself up and not passed out on the couch watching TV. So I would just do other things. I'd look at old pictures of the kids, old albums. Reading for me is it puts me to sleep. So I would just do things that kept me up until 10:30. I started playing the guitar again after 25 years. I picked that up and kind of worked on that. So that was fun. So just that initially too, I think seemed to help, because if I was even just sleeping, maybe out of that 6 hours I was in bed was 5 hours, maybe some nights 4.5, but it just seemed like better sleep. I was more relaxed. I didn't have that knot in my stomach. And then starting to work on that cognitive stuff about how you deal with the struggles, the exercises, and just continuing to work on that cognitive piece, which is the real, what we know about the brain. We often said before is that once you learn something, you can't really change it. But what we do know is neuroplasticity is a thing. Is that your brain will, those old connections about this is going to be horrible, this is bad, or I want to drink, or I want to use drugs, those connections die off and new ones are formed when you replace it with something else. And so it's a matter of, so that's really nice to have that cognitive piece about how you deal with these things. I'd watch these podcasts and it was so interesting. And when I'd be hearing people tell their story in the beginning, and it would just cause me so much anxiety because I could feel that when they're talking about they're not sleeping and that. And it was just like, oh, geez, where are we going? Let's get to the good stuff here eventually. I'm going to have to turn this off. And then by the end, it's like people turn things around. And I think what gave me hope was hearing people say, it's not perfect yet. But, and this is not a linear process. So you're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. And I think what you say too, is like, if you have a bad day, do you start researching about bad days and how not to have a bad day just because you had one bad day? We do it with sleep though. We do it with the nights. And that's the insanity of it. It seems like, because we're so hardwired. And what I also liked is I was not one who liked to get out of bed if I hadn't slept, and having permission just to lay in bed and rest when I was comfortable. That was really good for me.
So let's say you go to bed, you fall asleep, you wake up, and then you've got all these thoughts coming through your head, right? Oh, it's going to be one of these nights again. When you were really caught up in the struggle, that would kind of be like the starting gun going off, mm-hmm. ready to battle, right? What changed now? What was the new approach that you took in response to waking and in response to all the difficult thoughts and feelings that might have been showing up at that time?
I think acknowledging those thoughts. And for me, sometimes just the simple thing when you say there's still a body there, Your thoughts don't control you. There's still a body there. Move your arms, move your legs, tense your hands. And it's like you almost forget about it. No, I'm still in control of this thing. My thoughts aren't controlling me. My thoughts aren't going to kill me. Kind of really coming to believe that was true. And it just doesn't happen overnight. It's just like anything. It's you got to work it. And the more you can work it, I think that's really, that can be hard for people, keeping the end goal in mind and sticking with something. Because if it wasn't, we'd all be in this uber awesome shape. Everybody would work out and everything would be awesome. But that's not the human condition. So I think that it's just sticking with it, knowing what the end game is. And it can seem pointless. And it's like when you're at the gym, you're doing a curl, you look at yourself and you're going, geez, I'm still a 90-pound weakling. What in the world? But look, a year from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, it's putting off now for success later. And I think it was almost a challenge. Anything worth anything in life is difficult. And that is so true. The easiest things in life, it's like, I listen to this, he's an outdoor host, but he talks about, he goes, there's the fun you get when you go to amusement park and you're riding a ride and it's real awesome. And in the moment, it's really fun. And then there's the kind of fun when you're on these really challenging expeditions or hunts, when you're almost kind of miserable in the moment. But when you look back on it, you go, dang, that was pretty awesome. And that's kind of almost like what this journey has been. It's made me realize I'm stronger in regards to this than I ever thought I could be. That I can get by on far less sleep, because everything, and I'd written it to you a couple times, this blew up everything I thought I knew about sleep. It was all wrong.
We rarely get instant results, especially when it comes to skills or big picture goals that we have. So you use the example of weightlifting. If someone wants to get really big biceps, you're not going to get that from going to the gym one day, no matter how hard you work in the gym that day. What matters is just repeatedly turning up. It's that ongoing, committed, meaningful action, just repeating something that's important to you over and over again that gets you where you want to be.
Yeah, if you're afraid of being awake, your body tries to keep you awake because you're afraid of being awake. So let's stay awake. And here we go. It's just crazy. Before I learned what I learned, you're thinking you're broken. You're thinking something's going on where you might not ever sleep again. And that's, I think, the value of this whole course, the message boards and the value of hearing other people's stories, the support you get, and just a really practical, down there stuff. And like we say in NA, it works if you work it, sucks if you don't. So, you've always got the opportunity to work it or not. And then you get what you get. And you got what you got. So like I said, for me is just putting all those things together. And I don't like it sometimes if I can go for a string where I'm not having any difficulties. Like last night, it's almost kind of good for me to have those now and then. I think I had one maybe a couple weeks ago. But just to experience it again and go, okay, here it is. How are you going to handle it? Let's be, and last night, even just laying there, I was so comfortable and I just loved that. And I remember just thinking, a couple months ago, you'd have been just all geeked out and anxious. And here I am. It's cold in my room. I'm nice and warm and comfortable under these blankets. And if nothing else, oh darn it, this just feels good. Because in the past, I would wake up too. And I think it was that hyper arousal. You'd have the sweats going on. Your heart's beating, I'd be overheated. And it was just no bueno, no good.
Earlier on, you were talking about something else that often likes to come with insomnia that maybe is less spoken about. And it's just how it influences our days, especially with the the distracting thoughts related to sleep. How did you deal with the arrival of those difficult and distracting thoughts or those difficult feelings in a different way as you were working through the course?
It's an acceptance of those thoughts, kind of recentering, just they're there. Okay. But here I am, and I think some of it is that cognitive behavioral approach too, smelling the smells, looking around the room and seeing where I'm at. Okay, I'm here in the moment. This is this, and just trying to bring yourself back into that moment, acknowledging those thoughts. And again, they're just thoughts that can hurt you. And that's why I even started, like when I'd have a night, it's like I'd go into work and say, oh, I had a horrible night. I tell this person I work with. And then I just got to the point, they said, well, did you have a horrible night? I said, no, I just had a night. I just didn't sleep as much as I wanted to. It's just about reframing things, because our words can put so much emphasis and thoughts or emotion into things. Oh, this was so horrible. Well, maybe it wasn't that horrible. It wasn't what we wanted, but we don't always get what we want every single day and every single night. I remember when it was at its worst, where like my superpower was I could stare you right in the eyes and not hear a word you said as you were talking to me, because it's like you're just so wrapped up in your own thoughts, and somebody would be pouring, yeah, jeepers. Those days were something.
How long would you say that it took for your commitment to this new approach of building skill in acknowledgement, kindness, less struggle in response, less battling with sleep and all the difficult stuff that comes with it, when you were no longer engaged in that, when insomnia and the anxiety, the fatigue, all of that stuff was kind of losing its power and influence over your life? How long would you say that process took for you to get to that kind of point?
It was almost like immediately with the sleep restriction, I started feeling better, but it was just a slow process, Martin. It was hard to put any really timeline on it. I think, and I really took my time with the course and tried to go through it. I didn't want to race through it. It was months, and there's still every once in a while, like just having, it's kind of interesting, just having, even though I didn't feel bad last night, the thought would pop into my head once in a while. Hey, I wonder if you're going to sleep tonight. Huh. And it's like, I don't know. Chances are, yeah, because typically I always have a really good night. And if I don't, well, then maybe tomorrow night. And I think it's instead of really thinking sleep is the be all end all to a good day. And this is a line somebody else wrote on one of the message boards, was about, just giving sleep kind of a sideways glance, where, yeah, it's important, but not just staring it right in the eyes, where it's the most critical, important thing to having a good day.
Why do you feel that this approach of not trying to make a certain amount or a certain type of sleep happen, this approach of making space for difficult and uncomfortable thoughts and feelings to be present, working on being more present yourself when your mind tries to kind of time travel, why do you feel that approach has led to where you are today? Experiencing better nights, experiencing better days, being less tangled up in a struggle?
Because I think it takes the pressure off. It kind of, you would think it maybe doesn't, that you've got more stuff, you're feeling more things. But for me, it just kind of took more of the pressure off about being accepting of these things and not having to fight them. It's not like you're in a wrestling match, because that's exhausting. It's more of an Aikido type thing, where you're moving the movements, to your advantage, instead of fighting against it. And I think for me, that was a lot of it, was when I'd be feeling, I shouldn't be feeling this. Why am I feeling this? This is just, why? And then just going, you know what? It's okay. You're a human being. It's okay to feel this stuff. And it's just, like I said, giving yourself that permission being kind. And I've got a really good friend that talks about that all the time too. And he had suffered from chronic back pain, but he always does say that, man, you got to be kind to yourself. You're really tough on yourself. It's okay to lighten up now and then. And like I said, I think that's the biggest thing, is just taking the pressure off.
Yeah, and that fight, the fighting, the battling just requires so much more energy, effort, attention. And like you said, we can then put so much more pressure on ourselves because we want the rewards from all that fighting, from all that battling. So we fight and battle even harder. We put more pressure on ourselves, and we associate all these efforts and these trying as we can almost attach it to our self-worth almost. It's like, if I'm engaging in all this effort, all this fighting, and I'm still not getting X amount of sleep, then what does that say about me? Whereas really all it's saying is perhaps we can't make a certain amount or type of sleep happen through effort. But it's so easy for that insight to be clouded by all this self-talk and all this stuff that we can attach to the difficulty that we face and the challenges that we're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. You summed it up real well.
Well, I've got one last question for you, Tim. I know I've taken a lot of your time, and I really appreciate you coming on to share your experience. If someone with chronic insomnia is listening, they feel as though they've tried everything, that they are beyond help, that they'll never be able to stop struggling with insomnia, what would you say to them?
You are not unique. You are not broken. There's an approach that works. Give it time, be kind, be patient to yourself. There's this guy I follow too in yoga, and he talks about, and I forget the approach, where the research shows the harder you are on yourself after a failure, the more likely you are going to fail. You know, I think probably it's just that negative self-talk, but start telling yourself that you are worth it. You can do this, and it's going to work for you. I found it to be super helpful. I see other people that have been through the program, and it's a godsend. I tell you what, this whole thing has been just a true blessing. And I feel that it's kind of providence that brought me to you.
Well, I think I appreciate that. And I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you again, Tim, for taking the time out of your day to come on and share your journey.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Insomnia Coach podcast. If you're ready to get your life back from insomnia, I would love to help. You can learn more about the sleep coaching programs I offer at insomniacoach.com. And if you have any questions, my email address is hello@insomniacoach.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Insomnia Coach podcast. I'm Martin Reed, and as always, I'd like to leave you with this important reminder. You are not alone, and you can sleep.